Okay, welcome. Good morning. It's nice to see a whole group of people here ready to learn. I don't know if you know what you're in for, so hopefully you are feeling fresh and awake, because what we're going to learn today, please God, is something. Well, today we're going to start. We're going to start today. So typically this year has always been textual Hasidus. And what that means is that we take a discourse, usually a discourse from the Rebbe, and we learn it together inside the text, and we use that as an opportunity to develop ideas and to explore some really powerful spiritual concepts. So that's what we're going to be doing today, please God. I'll share the text with you on the screen. If you're not familiar with Hebrew, that's fine. It's not that you're not going to be able to follow just because you are not familiar with the Hebrew. This particular maamer, this particular discourse that we're going to learn together dates back to 1986. It's a discourse that the Rebbe said not exactly this time of the year, a little bit earlier in the year, shortly after Pesach. And it talks about one of the most fascinating concepts in Judaism. I think it's one of the most fascinating concepts. And that is the concept of Techias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. Now, it's not going to be a discussion about whether or not we believe in the resurrection, because that's taken as a given. Instead, what we're going to do is an exploration of the different spiritual states that a soul can experience after this life. So in the course of this particular maamer, what we're going to look at is the difference between this world, the world of souls, and the Messianic age. That's effectively what we're going to analyze. Now, we think we know about these things, we've been around, we've learned a little bit, we're familiar with certain things, of course, that are written in various Torah sources. So we might very well believe, I know this stuff already, I know what Jews believe. Jews basically believe you live in this world, that's where you get to do mitzvahs. If you do enough of them, they present you with a big welcome and thank you and some kind of a condominium in the next world. And that's pretty much how it works. What we're going to discover over here is a very deep and meaningful insight into the nature and the machinations of the spiritual realms. So the first part of this maamer might be kind of just introductory. By the time we get to the second paragraph, we'll start to get into some profound concepts. For those of you who have been part of this shiur previously, you'll know that the pace we follow is not necessarily the fastest, because we like to get through concepts thoroughly. And what we'll try here is to balance it a little bit. That means not to drag it out too much, but obviously also not to do things in a superficial manner. So let's dive right into it. You see on your screen, Lahavin Inyan Techias HaMesim. So the introduction of this particular discourse, for those people who are familiar with how the Rebbe would speak, there were two styles that the Rebbe used. The one is what is called a sicha. A sicha is where the Rebbe would sit in front of a large crowd. You can imagine that sometimes that shul was absolutely packed. For those people who've been to New York and visited 770 Lubavitch World Headquarters, the place can get pretty packed. And the Rebbe would sit at the head of a long table, and he would speak 20 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour at a time. Then they would sing nigunim, then he would speak again. And classically, the style of the talk is what we call a sicha. Now, a sicha could have been addressing a current affairs issue. A sicha could have been an analysis of an issue in Torah, either in the parish of the week or in an area of Torah law, etc. There was a very unique interaction that happened between the Rebbe and Hasidim, which was called a maamer. The direct translation of a maamer would be discourse or a statement. I don't know, different people use different words to explain it. But effectively, the idea and the goal of a maamer is that was a moment where you felt that Hashem kind of flowed directly through the Rebbe, similar to what you would find with Moshe, where it describes that the divine presence spoke through his throat. And it's an amazing thing to watch. If you've ever seen video footage of the Rebbe saying a maamer, it's like he's teleported into another realm, and the words would just flow in the most incredible way, without ums and ahs, without any preparation. It was literally just the spirituality gushing out of his mouth. And he would explore deep spiritual concepts in great detail. So that's what we're studying over here, is a maamer. This maamer, as all maamorim, would always begin with a particular introductory line. Sometimes the line was a quotation, sometimes it was just a comment. So here he starts off, Lahavin Inyan Techias HaMesim, that the objective of this particular maamer is to understand the principle, the concept of the resurrection of the dead. It's a very important concept in Judaism, according to the Rambam, when he lists the 13 ikarim, the 13 fundamental principles that Judaism is built on. This is number 13. So number 12 is the belief in Mashiach. Number 13 is the belief in the resurrection of the dead. And many people have a really hard time with this. Why? Why do we need resurrection of the dead? I mean, why can't we just move off to a spiritual realm? Who wants to come back here anyway? People get worried about overpopulation and lack of resources, and who knows what's going to happen to climate change if we have all these people coming back. And what happens if there's somebody from the past who you don't really get along with, and then they're going to come back to haunt you, and all the complexities of people who may have been married and then divorced or widowed and then remarried. Okay, so we're not going to deal with any of those sticky halachic issues. But for many people, they just simply don't understand what's the value, what's the point. Why would Hashem want our souls to come back here? This is the question that prompts this maamer. Lahavin inyan tchias hamesim. We need to understand, what is this concept of resurrection of the dead? Why is it so important? Why is it so central? Why does it exist at all? So by way of introduction, he tells us in a Isa Mishnah, it says in the Mishnah, in Sanhedrin is the tractate that deals with the laws of the judiciary and the punishments that are sometimes meted out on people. And then right at the end of it, it talks about this concept. It's a perek, the chapter that is called perek chelek. And in fact, chelek means a portion, and it comes directly from this quotation. That's how it gets its name. Isa Mishnah, it says in the Mishnah, you might very well know this Mishnah because it's brought as the introduction before we study Pirkei Avos. What does the Mishnah say? Kol Yisrael yesh lohem chelek lo'olam haba. Every single Jew, without exception, has a portion in the world to come. Okay, I said without exception, but you'll see in a moment that there might be an exception. That's classic Judaism, right? It's 100% this way, except it might not. That's the complexity of the Jewish mind, you know. So what does it say? Kol Yisrael yesh lohem chelek lo'olam haba. Every single Jewish person has a portion in the world to come. So the question then is, what's the world to come? V'yadua, the pirush olam haba b'mishnah zoi hu olam atchia. So it is well known that in this specific Mishnah, the expression olam haba, the world to come, refers to the world of the resurrection. Now he has to tell us that that's in this specific Mishnah, because in other places when we use the word olam haba, we refer to Gan Eden. So for example, if a person goes on a shiva call and you want to wish somebody well, you might say that their soul is now in Gan Eden. You might also say their soul is now in olam haba, and that would be acceptable. It's fine to speak that way. But in this Mishnah, it's being very specific. And when it says olam haba, the world to come, it actually refers specifically to the world of the resurrection. It's quite interesting because there are certain of the commentaries who say, how many worlds do the Jews believe in? Interesting question, right? How many worlds do the Jews believe in? Not so long ago, just over a week ago, we celebrated the 12th of Tammuz. The 12th of Tammuz commemorates the day when the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, was released in quite miraculous fashion from Soviet prison. So this was at the time of Stalin's iron fist, and nobody got out of prison, especially not somebody who was accused of being public enemy number one, and especially in his case, who had a death sentence. The fact that he was released from prison is a huge miracle. And he chronicled his experiences in the prison, and one of the experiences was when a fellow who unfortunately himself happened to be Jewish, but very much a communist, threatened the Rebbe with a pistol. And they wanted the previous Rebbe to inform on other members of the community who were involved in his underground network of shuls and schools and mikvahs. So the fellow threatened him with a pistol, and he said, you have to understand, this little toy is capable of getting even a stone to speak. And the previous Rebbe said to him, that little toy will only frighten somebody who believes they only have one life and many gods. But for we who believe in many lives, or many worlds, the expression used was many worlds, and only one God, we're not intimidated by that little toy. So how many worlds do the Jews have? How many worlds do we have? So some of the commentaries say 2 worlds. This world and the next world. And that's something you will often hear people say. There's this world and the next world. When we talk about this world, sometimes, depending on the context, we include Gan Eden, the world of the souls, in this world because it is available currently. Even though you and I are not there right now, we're in the physical plane, but that world exists currently, and there are souls that occupy that world currently. So therefore, to use generically the word Olam Haba, a world that is still to come, that must refer to something that hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened on the physical plane, and it hasn't happened yet on the spiritual plane. So in this particular Mishnah, when we use that word, Olam Haba, the world to come, we're talking about the world that hasn't yet happened, Olam Atchia, the time of the resurrection. If you're not convinced, he'll prove it. If you continue to read the rest of the Mishnah, the lesser known part of the Mishnah, the part that people prefer not to talk about, you know how it is, there's always that part of the discussion nobody wants to have. So the other part of the Mishnah says that there are exceptions. We said at the beginning that every single Jew has a portion in the world to come, but there are exceptions. What are the exceptions? An exception would be if somebody denies the concept of resurrection. This is what we call sweet justice, right? The person who denies the concept of of resurrection is the person who cannot be resurrected. And the Gemara says, the Gemara says it very clearly. This is a story of an individual who rejected the concept of resurrection. Therefore, that person has no option to be resurrected because he has chosen to reject it. And the expression that the Gemara uses is midah keneged midah, which, by the way, is a pretty dominant theme in Judaism. Midah keneged midah. Hashem treats us in a way that suits our own behavior. So all kinds of examples that are used about that. For example, the Gemara tells us that Shimshon, remember Samson, the mighty Samson, the great superhero of the Jewish people, the inspiration for Marvel Comics. So Shimshon's a big, powerful, that's how everybody sees him, right? It's a terrible thing that we've got this picture in our mind that Samson was like this big bulging bicep kind of a guy who went around smashing Philistines. Shimshon was a holy man. Shimshon, if you looked at him, his face radiated. That's why his name is Shimshon, from the word Shemesh, the sun. He radiated holiness like the sun radiates light. He was a man of deep spiritual power. That's why he took on the Philistines, but this is not a class about Shimshon. So what does it say about Shimshon? Shimshon had a particular mission. The reason his soul descended into this world was to destroy the Philistine nation. That was his job. And to a large extent, he succeeded. King David finished the job, but to a large extent, he succeeded. The purpose of his soul's entry into this world was to deal massive blows to the Philistines. In order to do that, part of what he needed to do was to get, so to speak, into the inside of the Philistine camp. And so he had this whole grandiose plan. The Rambam writes about it, that he had this grandiose plan that he would find Philistine women and he would convert them to Judaism. Along the way, he'd marry them. And that was fine. That was actually sanctioned. It was actually acceptable according to Torah. What did he do wrong? He turns to his parents at one point and he says, get that, that's the Philistine woman that I want to marry. Kihi yashra be'enai, because she is good looking to my eyes. Now, he was supposed to be Hashem's agent. It's not about you. It's not about your perception. It's not about your what appeals to you. It's doing what Hashem wants. That should have been his motivation. The minute he says, Hi yasha be'enai, she's good in my eyes, midah keneged midah, the Gemara tells us, straight away he put himself into a situation that he was later going to be punished with his eyes. As we know, the end of the story is that the Philistines gouged out his eyes. So that's a principle we have in Judaism, midah keneged midah, that Hashem behaves towards us in line with how we ourselves have behaved. That's a negative example. There are many, many positive examples. One of them, the Gemara tells us, of course, is Miriam. Miriam, who was very protective of her little brother Moshe, who had to be put into a basket into the Nile, so she stayed hiding in the reeds just to make sure that he was okay and that no harm would befall him. So because she stayed and waited to look after her brother, years later, many years later, when she herself was afflicted with tzoras, which was that biblical disease, and she couldn't move, the whole Jewish world had to stop their travels through the desert to wait for her. Why? Mida keneged mida. She had waited for Moshe, so now she deserved that everybody should wait for her. So that's how Hashem operates. He treats us in line with the way that we behave. That, the Gemara says, is what happens over here. If somebody turns around and says, God, I don't believe in your Tchias HaMesim. Nonsense. Not because they're ignorant. Obviously, if a person doesn't know any better, they can't be held accountable for information they lack. But if a person does know, and a person has learned, and a person's done their research, and then turns around and says, Hashem, it's rubbish, I don't believe it, and rejects it, so the Gemara says, in that case, that person can't have it. You don't want it, you can't have it. It's like when the Jews said, we can't go into Israel after the spies. Hashem said, you're right. If that's your attitude, you can't go into Israel. Or like the Gemara will tell us, that Yom Kippur can achieve atonement for anything that a person ever does wrong, except the person who breaks Yom Kippur. Doesn't make any sense. If you disrespect Yom Kippur, how can Yom Kippur help you? So if a person disrespects the concept of the resurrection, how can the resurrection work for them? Why did we get into that conversation? Because we wanted to make it clear that all of the commentary around this Mishnah brings us back to the concept that Olam Haba, the world to come, in that context refers to the time of the resurrection. And the statement is, it's open season. That means there could be Jews who served idols. There could be Jews who were murderers, God forbid. There could be Jews who did the most heinous sins, and they will still have a portion in this experience of Olam Haba, which means the time of the resurrection. So now we really need to understand, what is that time? What is it all about? And how is it so universally available to every single Jewish person who exists? We're continuing now in the text, looking at the 6th line, in the middle of the line. This is the meaning of the statement of our sages, that every single person, every single Jewish person has access to Olam Haba. Now comes the interesting part. Gan Eden. When we talk about Gan Eden, you know what Gan Eden is, right? What's Gan Eden? Paradise. Gan Eden is the so-called heaven. Gan Eden is what everybody tells you is the destination of souls after a person lives this world. The entry requirements for Gan Eden are not so simple as we're about to see. But just parenthetically, he tells us, and I'll go through this quickly because we've already discussed it, just tells us parenthetically that there is reason sometimes to refer to Gan Eden as the world to come, even though it currently exists, because what we're trying to say is the world to come to so-and-so. It's the world that will become available to so-and-so at a later point. Okay, so what are the entry requirements for Gan Eden? By the way, when you hear this, you'll have perhaps a little bit more sympathy for the Australians. I think it's easier to get an Australian visa than it is to get into Gan Eden, by the description that our sages give. So let's read it again. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the sentence before the brackets just to give flow. Gan Eden ksiv. With regards to Gan Eden, the verse says, Mi yale bahar havaya goimer. Who is capable of ascending the mountain of God? Who? It's a verse in Tehillim. Who is capable? Neki chapayim uvar levov. Goimer. The person who has clean hands and a clear heart. Now, what exactly entails clean hands, and what exactly entails what exactly it entails to have a clear heart? That's subject for another whole conversation. But suffice it to say this: it's higher grade. It's not simple stuff. Having a clean hands basically means clean of sin. Person hasn't sullied their hands by getting involved in behavior that the Torah does not allow. And a clear heart means not only do you do what you should do, but your emotional connection with what you're supposed to do is clear. It's pure, sincere intentions. Okay, I think once we start to look at this, we start to worry a little bit. I'm not sure. Do I make the grade? What's going to happen when I get up there? They're going to say, look, I think you're a nice person and you've done a lot of good things in your life, but you didn't hit the mark of Neki Chapayim or Val Levov. Not everybody gets into Gan Eden. So we know that there's a whole cleansing process, like when you go to the malls and they come and ask if they could wash your car. It's already a painful experience even before they start. Or more painful than that is the window washers. Yes, who loves the window washers? I'd like to know. It's a painful experience. Yeah, somebody comes uninvited into your face and they start with their dirty water cleaning your windscreen. Let me tell you, this is nothing compared to the cleaning process that a neshama has to go through in order to qualify for Gan Eden. Why? Because we all arrive over there, we've got some schmutz. That's the reality. As we say at every funeral, there's no person so righteous upon this earth who does only good and never sins. I love the translation, by the way they make it sound so flowery. So what's the message? The message is that nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. And in order to get into Gan Eden, it would appear that they expect a pretty high level. So Gan Eden, there are all kinds of hoops that you have to get through if you would like a position in Gan Eden. There are all kinds of prerequisites that a person has to be able to achieve before that person is allowed entry to Gan Eden. So this is actually surprising now, because the Mishnah tells us without any hesitation that every single Jewish person has automatic, unfettered access to the world to come, i.e. the world of resurrection. Yet the Tanakh tells us in Tehillim that in order to get into Gan Eden, there are all kinds of expectations that you have to meet to be able to have such an opportunity. So straight away, what should be fermenting in your mind right now is, how's that possible? How is it possible that Gan Eden has more difficult access than the world to come? In other words, something's not adding up over here. The world to come sounds like it's the ultimate. Does it sound logical to you that in order to get into the almost highest level takes a tremendous amount of work, but to get to the highest level, no, that's fine. You're good. Walk through the door. Thank you very much. Shkoyach. We know that you haven't done a whole lot of Torah mitzvahs, but that's okay. It's not going to be an impediment. Something doesn't seem to add up over here. Now, what we usually do in Chassidus is we introduce a concept, and then we raise a question, sometimes a very heavy question about the concept, and then we go off on what appears to be a tangent. Don't be distracted by the tangent. In this particular maamer, it's not a major tangent. We're actually going to pretty much stick with the main theme throughout, which is refreshing, because sometimes in a maamer, you can go for a few pages talking about what appears to be a totally different topic and only later tie it all together. But the principle over here is you've got to, as they say in Yiddish, halt kop. In other words, you've got to just keep in mind what we're trying to achieve. So he's going to explain right now what the question is, what it is that we have to try and understand. But just to give you a heads up, this is the key thing that we need to understand. How could it be that Gan Eden appears to be more difficult to access than the so-called world to come, the time of resurrection? And we'll develop that question further. In the course of doing so, we're going to learn quite a lot about the different modes of spiritual revelation, of divine revelation, and that's going to help us to understand what the nature is of these two realities, of course, compared to the reality of the world that we live in. We're also going to, through the course of this maamer, we're going to link up these different realities with the different modalities of connection that exist in this world, which is basically Torah and mitzvahs. Now, I know for a lot of people, Torah and mitzvahs sounds like just one blurred concept, but we're going to make quite a strong distinction between what kind of relationship you forge with Hashem through Torah learning versus the kind of relationship through the observance of mitzvahs. Those will be the main components of this particular maamer. So moving now to the second paragraph. As I say, anybody who's been part of this shiur previously at this point is trying to catch their breath, because I don't think we've ever gone through this amount of text in this amount of time. No promises that we'll keep this pace though, because now we're starting to get into the heavy stuff. V'tzorich lahavin We need to understand what's going on over here. Harei yodua, it is well known. Shehagiloi sheyeh ba'olam atchiyah hu nale harbe yoser mehagiloi de Gan Eden. It's very well known that, notice the word he uses over here, giloi. I'm going to talk about that in a second. The giloi, the revelation that will be available in the world of Tchiyah, the next world, the next phase of existence after the resurrection, is nale harbe yoser, is exponentially beyond the kind of giloi, revelation, that will be available in Gan Eden. So what are we talking about? Revelation. Where does this word come into it? Don't we always talk about reward? Isn't that what people tell you? You work hard in this world, you check the boxes, you do everything that Hashem says. At the end, you get a scorecard, right? You come upstairs, get the scorecard. I don't know how it works. Maybe they've got like this massive LED screen and you walk in and everybody applauds. Here comes number 6,432 or whatever it is. Everybody's like, whoa, shkoyach, wonderful, look at the things that you did. And like your life flashes by on this big, massive screen. And then you get rewarded, right? Isn't that what we're always told? You get rewarded. Whatever that reward is. For some people, it's sipping martinis on some kind of a tropical beach in the sky. For other people, it's spending time with their favorite pet who can never die. I don't know. Everybody has these funny ideas of what it is. People who've learned a little bit more, they say you go into the yeshiva. There's this big yeshiva that you're going to go into, the heavenly academy, as they call it. And once you get there, they'll give you a front row seat and everybody will be very respectful of you. I don't know, whatever it is. Most people associate the world to come with reward, and parenthetically, punishment. That's usually the association. So either you're rewarded or you're punished. Here we're suddenly using different language. We don't say a word about schar. We don't say a word about reward. We talk about giloi. What is giloi? Giloi means revelation. And revelation is the single biggest thing that is missing in our lives. So if you want to define life as a human is that we are blind. That's life as a human. And if you think I'm exaggerating, let's look at it this way. So what's today? Today's the 13th of July, 2020. If you went back to the 13th of July, 2019, and anybody on this planet would have asked anybody on this planet, what do you think you'll be doing on the 13th of July, 2020? Well, I could tell you that the list would look nothing like what any of us are doing right now. That's for sure. Some people would tell you, every July we go down to the coast. Every July we go to Israel. By that time, my business is going to be just where I wanted it to be, because we've got these products that are coming and this is going to be amazing. Or somebody would tell you, by next year, July, for sure, without a question, the kids are going to be engaged because they've been dating already for 3 years. Or maybe you'd be celebrating the wedding. Or whatever. Nobody would have been able to predict what July 2020 was going to look like, not only in July 2019, even in January 2020. To be human, the human experience is to be mostly blind. We don't see what's coming. And it's a frightening thought, but if you really, really want to think about it, it works like this. Not only don't we know what's coming in July 2021, you don't know what's coming in the next minute. In the next minute, we could be sitting here on this Zoom, and in the next minute, chas v'shalom, tu, all those things. This is South Africa after all. The power could go off. And just like that, at this incredibly exciting part of the maamer, we'll all be left hanging. That's possible. What could happen in the next minute is somebody could knock on your door and say, hi, you won a competition 10 years ago and we lost your address and here's the $100,000 that you made in the competition. Could happen. We're absolute. Not only that, not only are we blind about what's going to happen next, we are blind to what is right in front of our eyes. This is the fascinating thing. And I love the fact that we're living in the Zoom world right now because it helps to illustrate this, you see? Because one thing that the Zoom world illustrates to us is that we see nothing. You know what you see? That's what you see. You see head and shoulders. We've all become head and shoulders. Nobody knows what's going on outside. I mean, it looks nice, right? You can see behind me, there's a clean wall. There's a nice certificate of smicha on the back wall over there. That's it. Looks fantastic. I look at you, I can see that, you've got a nice house. It looks like it's very well kept. I don't know what's happening 1 meter to the left. Maybe that's where you've dumped everything because you've been locked up in your house for 4 months and you don't have proper help. So you've just piled everything. I don't know. We're blind. We don't see anything. Not only that. You look at whatever device it is that you're currently looking at to follow this shiur. Look at the device right in front of you. What do you see? You just see the outer skin. You see the screen. You see the edge. You see the material that it's made of. You don't see the circuitry that's running this thing. You don't see the code that's making the program called Zoom work. You don't see the molecules that make up the tiny particles and elements that hold the whole thing. You don't see any of it. So to live in this world is to live blind. Now, why is that important? It's not really important, actually. What, do you really want to see all the molecules running around? Is that what you wish? I'd love to see the molecules. You go mad. Imagine seeing everything in molecular level. We'd go crazy. We like the fact that there are skins, and so that's how I can tell the difference between the table and the pen that's sitting on the table. If I only saw the molecules, I don't know how I would ever find the pen. But all of that is just indicative of the fact that we live blind, and the most important thing that we're blind to is truth. That's what we're blind to. Because you know what truth is? Truth is that Hashem is real. That's truth. We don't live with that. We learn about Hashem. We talk about Hashem. We get disappointed by Hashem. We feel abandoned by Hashem. Sometimes we question Hashem. We don't see Him. We don't even necessarily see clear evidence of Him. Sometimes we do. Sometimes something happens. We think, oh, there you go. Hashem is running the show. And other times we have our hands up in exasperation and say, what on earth is going on over here? What are you doing? If you're running this world, what are you doing with it? Where's this Mashiach you promised us? And 100 other questions that we have. What's most missing in our lives is revelation. The truth is not revealed. The truth is theoretical. Reminds me of that famous story of Rebbe Yitzchak Obaditch, of the great Hasidic master, who once stood up in Shul on Yom Kippur. And he was in Shul, got onto the bimah, and he slammed his hand down on the bimah to get everybody's attention, and he said what was probably one of the most emotive speeches ever. We've all sinned, we've all messed up, we're not connected, we haven't davened properly, we haven't learnt as much as we should have, we don't give as much tzedakah, the whole thing. And people were, as you can well imagine, it's Yom Kippur, people were shaken. And then he gives another bang on the table, on the bimah. He says, and God, it is your fault. So if everybody was shaken before, they were definitely shaken now. So this is the moment where people start ducking, because you think the lightning bolt is coming. How do you say that? On Yom Kippur, it's Hashem's fault. And he continued as follows, and what is one of the most useful metaphors to understand what's going on over here. He says, Hashem, if you would have taken all of the impulses of this world and the distractions of this world and the temptations of this world and the weakness of the human form and put that into a set of encyclopedias that we would keep on our shelf, and then you would take your own godliness and the world to come and you would put that in front of our face, we'd do everything you want. But what did you do, Hashem? You put all the temptation and the distraction and the weakness into our faces, and God and the Gan Eden you put into books on the shelf. What do you think's going to happen? You think we're not going to mess up? That's called lack of giloi, or the alternative word for it is what we call hester panim, concealment. The reality of our world is concealment. We don't understand what's going on. We don't see the purpose. There are more questions than answers. There is more pain than pleasure. There is all kind of distraction, And the question of Hashem for many people remains a question. What changes when a person goes to Gan Eden? What changes when a person goes to the world of resurrection? Gilui. All of the things that were theory, that were hidden, that we had to mull over and debate, they become exposed. We start to see truth. We start to see Hashem. So what are we saying now? That the Giloi, the extent to which we could experience Hashem in the world of resurrection, is exponentially greater than the kind of experience of Hashem that you can have in Gan Eden. So what is similar, what is common to both Gan Eden and the world to come? They're both states of revelation of Hashem's truth. But the degree of that revelation, as it is in Gan Eden, and Gan Eden is so powerful and so compelling that souls are like excited by the experience, but that is nothing, it's fractional compared to the kind of revelation that will happen once we have Tchiyah, the world of resurrection. Now that's only going to strengthen our question, as you'll see. Continuing now, the second line in the second paragraph. וכמובן גם מזה שגן עדן ישנה גם עכשיו, מה שאין כן הגילוי דעולם התחייה יהיה רק ליוסד לבוי. One of the clues that lets you know that what's going to happen in the time of the resurrection is exponentially beyond what happens in Gan Eden is the fact that Gan Eden exists currently. And the resurrection hasn't yet happened. In other words, we're moving towards something. There's a goal that we haven't yet achieved. There's a level that we haven't yet attained. Just to add to this concept, even furthermore, this concept of the resurrection, that is a stage that will be after the stage of the time of Moshiach. Okay, what does that mean? We're constructing a hierarchy over here. Our world that we live in now, everybody will acknowledge is the lowest spiritual realm that you can ever be in. And if you don't believe that, if you don't believe it's as low spiritually as you can get into your car, drive around a little bit, and you'll see straight away. This world is not a spiritual place. It's not. Spirituality is not the natural state of this world. Look at the litter. Look at the way people drive. Look at how people speak to each other. Look at the discord in our community. It's not a spiritual place. One level up would be Gan Eden. Gan Eden is a spiritual place. Gan Eden is a place where the soul speaks. Gan Eden is a place where you experience revelation of godliness. It's a wonderful environment to be in. But Gan Eden already exists. So it's kind of the best that we have at the moment. We also have the promise of better to come. So what comes after Gan Eden? Mashiach comes. So Mashiach is an aspirational state. Even souls that are in Gan Eden, they also aspire to Mashiach. Now that's a fascinating thought, but they do. That tells you that the experience of Mashiach's times will be even greater than the experience of Gan Eden. And then the time of Tchias HaMeis and the resurrection of the dead is even beyond Mashiach. That tells you it's an even greater experience. And he's going to illustrate this to us, borrowing from the Shabbos davening, as you'll see now in the brackets. Ein arech lecha chule bein amazeh, vein ze los chule lecha yelom haba, efes b'lcha chule l'moisa Mashiach, vein doim lecha chule l'tchias HaMeis. Shedaled inyonim elu heim beseder del milamato l'mayla. Okay, so what's the prayer? On Shabbos morning, after we say Baruch Hu, before we say Shema, we add a few extra paragraphs that we do not say during the week. And the first of those paragraphs concludes with these four phrases. What are the four phrases? We say, Ein aroich lecha Hashem Elokeinu ba'olam hazeh. Hashem, in this world, nothing is relative in its greatness to you. That means to say, whatever you sit and meditate on, I know people get very excited. I do. I personally love to be in nature because I think when you're in nature, you feel a little bit more of Hashem. You stand, you watch a magnificent waterfall. You look out at the ocean, climb a mountain, peer into a telescope. I mean, can you imagine the experience of being in the International Space Station and just seeing the vastness of the universe? So you look at all of those things and you think, whoever made this, unbelievable. Whoever made the perfect balance of nature, the way that ecosystems work, the way that that stars explode and supernova and all these things, it's unbelievable. So whoever made that has to be phenomenal. So we say, everything that exists in this world is not aroich. It has no erech. It has no relative greatness to Hashem's real greatness. In this world, whatever we'll perceive will always leave us with but there must be more. So what's beyond that? So then the davening continues. Hashem, there is none besides you in the world to come. There, the world to come refers to Gan Eden, as we'll see in a second. So Gan Eden helps me to understand that there's a lot more to Hashem's greatness, but I come to the appreciation that there's nothing else besides Hashem. Then we continue. I don't want to get too technical over here because it sounds very similar, but we use the word Efes as opposed to the word Ein, which is like a higher acknowledgement of how there's literally nothing else other than Hashem. And that will be experienced when Mashiach comes. The only time we address Hashem directly is Tchias HaMesim, and the time of the resurrection of the dead. So in other words, that's when we get to the time of the resurrection, that's where we'll see Hashem, so to speak, the closest that is possible. And that's what he's going to spell out for us over here. So basically we establish a hierarchy, and the hierarchy over here helps us to understand and to appreciate that there are multiple layers of experience that a person can have, divine experience. Each layer is exponentially more advanced than the preceding layer, and the ultimate experience is Tchias HaMesim. Let's understand that for a second. Okay, so I'll tell you a story that happened, I don't know, it must have been 30 years ago. I was with a few friends, and we were hiking in the Drakensberg, in the Royal Natal National Park. I don't know how many people here have hiked in the Royal Natal National Park. There's a particular hike over there that they nicknamed the Crack. It's about a 5-hour hike, nothing too terrible. And basically what you do is you hike up for about 2 hours, and you reach a point where a piece of the cliff had collapsed. And you walk up in between the two cliff sides that have been left on either side. So in the middle is rubble, which is these massive boulders. Some of them are so large that you have to use chain ladders to be able to get over them. And it's the most magnificent experience because as you're climbing, so on either side of you, you have these towering cliffs. I don't remember exactly how high they are, but they're high. You look up and you see the sky. You look behind you and you see the tops of the trees of the forest below. It's a magnificent experience. So there we were on one of these massive boulders that, like I say, was so large you have to use a chain ladder. And the following conversation happened between us. Don't you feel really small right now? Now here you are on one single boulder, and you're clinging to this chain ladder for dear life because, God forbid, if you slip, you could fall a few meters down onto the rocks below. You feel really small. And then you have these towering cliffs on either side, which make you feel even more puny. So we had this conversation about we take ourselves so seriously and we think we're such big deals. And then you stand on this one little crack on the side of one little mountain in the Drakensberg range, which goes for hundreds of kilometers. And you think, who am I? What, I'm such a big deal. I make such a big fuss about myself. I'm nothing compared to the magnitude of this mountain range. And then you think for a second, this mountain range, the Drakensberg, it's not the Alps. As mountain ranges go, it's not the Himalayas. It's the Drakensberg, our backyard mountains. And look how overwhelmingly big that is. So can you imagine then how small I actually am relative to the whole of South Africa? Because this is just Drakensberg, it's just one range. But can you imagine how tiny I am compared to the whole country, with its different mountain ranges, with its rivers, with its lakes, with its coastline. Unbelievable. And then when you think about it, how insignificant is this Drakensberg range if I had a look at the world, if I was in the International Space Station looking down at the world? Nothing. You can't even see it. Right now, to me, this is the most dominating scene. I'm afraid of where to put my foot next. From up there, they don't even see the Drakensberg. And then think for a second, how significant is this entire planet Earth in the context of the solar system? Here I am, I think I'm such a big deal. When I'm confronted with a tiny piece of one part of the physical world, I'm overwhelmed. So where do I fit? Where does my whole world fit in the solar system? And then you think, where does the solar system feature in the Milky Way? If you were able to look out at the Milky Way, you wouldn't even be able to identify which tiny little spot of light over there is our whole solar system. And then you realize that the Milky Way is only one galaxy. Imagine the Milky Way compared to the whole universe, how insignificant that would be. And then you tell yourself, and all of that is created by Hashem, and not only once upon a time, but He actually creates it every single day, as the verse says, and we quoted in our davening, "Amachadesh b'tuvoi b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereishis," that Hashem reinstates the whole creation every single day, and then we say, in Olam Hazeh, in this world, that is the greatness that I could perceive of Hashem. Wow, Hashem is amazing. Hashem is so amazing because He made all of this. What happens in the next world? Neshama goes up to the next world. You suddenly realize, what? You think that's why Hashem is great? You think Hashem is great because He made your world? That's the extent of appreciation of Hashem's greatness that you were capable of conjuring up in your mind, that He made a world that is impressive to humans? You know what that's like? That's like the child whose father is a professor of mathematics bragging to his friends, "My father knows how to calculate without using his fingers." Yeah, it impresses the child. It's a shtickle insult to the father. So you go to Gan Eden, and suddenly you have another whole perspective. And suddenly you realize that Hashem's greatness is despite what He created, not because of what He created. You suddenly realize that Hashem is beyond being a creator. Creator is like the easiest thing that He did. He said a few words and things came to be. Kihu Omar Vayehi. He spoke and things came into existence. How hard is it to talk? How much of you gets invested in a few sentences that you say? If you work it out, by the way, try work it out. Let's say that you spoke for 3, 4, 5 minutes. Try work out how much that is compared to all the words you say in a lifetime, and then compare that to all the thoughts that you have, and then compare that to all the potential thoughts you could have had. That's kind of how much space and energy it required from Hashem to create our world. So the revelation I have is, suddenly I realize that Hashem is not defined by creator. Creator is the least of His abilities, the least of His greatness. It happened to impress me because I was a citizen of the physical universe. Then comes the time of Moshiach. In the time of Moshiach, I realized, you know what? The perception that I had in Gan Eden was that Hashem is far greater than what I thought. In simple terms, we use this expression. We say there's certain things you can know what they are, and there's certain things you can only know what they are not. So for example, when you ask somebody, please define spiritual, most people will say, not physical. That means I don't really know what spiritual is, so I'm telling you what it isn't. When I live in this world, I try to define Hashem as what He is. What is He? He's a creator. That's what I think. I get to the next world, I realize, no, that's what He's not. I still don't know what He is. I just know that I can't limit Him to that. Comes the time of Mashiach and I start to get an insight into what He is. I start to get an insight into what lies behind that creator. What kind of a mind the creator has. What kind of so-called feelings the creator felt before he was a creator. But the time of the Treatise HaMaasim, we say, Ein doime lecha. That's face to face with Hashem Himself. You know, when you talk about a person, you know how it is. You could refer to a person by their achievements. Oh, there's so-and-so the doctor, so-and-so the lawyer. You could refer to a person by their family position. Oh, that's my father, that's my son. You could refer to a person by their physical appearance. There's the person with the brown hair who's 6 foot tall. But sometimes you speak to a person directly and you connect with them. Them is not their qualification. It's not their position in the family or the community. It's not their physical features. It's something that you can't quite put your finger on, but you know that you've got to them. That's what's going to happen in Treatise HaMaasim. This ultimate state, the so-called Olam Haba, the world to come, Hashem will expose Himself, not what He does, not how He is greater than what He does, not what He thinks, not what He feels, but Him. It's like the ultimate, it's mind-blowing. We can't even get our heads around it because typically you can only really know what something really is if you are that thing. Like nobody can know you like you know yourself. So how can I really know Hashem? It's beyond human comprehension. So what is clear to us? Whatever spiritual experiences a person may have in this world or in Gan Eden or even in the time of Mashiach will absolutely pale in comparison to the kind of revelation that's going to happen in the time of Olam Haba, the world to come, the age of resurrection. If that's the case, second last line on the page, then we have a big question. Now it only strengthens our original question. How does it make any sense at all that to gain access to Gan Eden, which is a relatively lower revelation of godliness, takes a whole lot of prerequisite, but to have access to Olam Haba, the time where Hashem will expose Himself in the utmost, it requires no prerequisites? It's open to everybody? How does that work? How does it make any sense? How is it possible that to achieve something far greater requires far less? It seems totally counterintuitive. That's the big issue that this maamer wants to tackle. And that's, please God, what we'll begin to try to unpack from next week. So yeah, it ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger, but it's definitely food for thought and hopefully will stimulate a lot of thinking over the next few days.